Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Helen Gautchi. I'm working in the research and development and education support for DNALife, and really going to focus today on one of my passion projects called DNA Mind. This test was developed a number of years ago. Really, before I think mental health was at the forefront of so many areas of health. After COVID, it just became really, really important to focus on this aspect of overall health. And we know that we can't have overall health, we can't achieve that without having mental health. So this is really the point of DNA Mind, to be able to understand if you have predispositions to different areas in mental health, leading to disorders around your neurodegenerative diseases, specifically your late onset Alzheimer's disease, your cognitive decline, dementia, all late onset. Looking at mood dysregulation from increasing risk for bipolar disorder or mood instability, anxiety, things like that, and then the addictive behaviors. And that ranges from looking at your substance abuses as well as behavior addictions as well. So considering, I think, some of the major three aspects of mental health and where we want to try and achieve the best state by supporting biological areas that drive these specific disorders. So the test looks at a number of, as I mentioned, biological areas that then drive or increase risk for your neurodegenerative disorders. That you will see in the report is symbolized by a big N for neurodegenerative disorders. Again, emphasizing and just reminding you that your late onset Alzheimer's disease, your dementia and cognitive decline, your M for mood regulation and mood disorders driven by a number of biological pathways, and then addictive behavior. So, and looking at, as I mentioned already, your substance abuse, as well as things like eating disorders, binge eating behavior, and gambling as examples of addictive behavior. So something to keep in mind, and I think this is where this test does become a little bit tricky to really understand and interpret just at face value, is that you can see that there is overlap in some of the biological pathways, that if you have an issue in one area, it may actually increase risk for mood dysregulation as well as neurodegenerative disorders. And what I hope to achieve today is to try and simplify it for you, try and really help you grasp the key aspects of the report and the little pearls that really are kind of shining out for you, and what to do about it at the end of the day. So when the test was developed, and something just to emphasize here, it was to consider, it's not a diagnostic test. It was to, one of the big issues, especially in psychiatric disorders, is the lack of really good data and biochemical tests available to diagnose someone. So this, again, is not to give that kind of information, but it's here to be able to help healthcare practitioners and their patients and individuals who are really interested in their health to identify where there might be weaknesses in certain biological pathways because of a variant that you carry in a gene. So that gene then maybe leads, as an example here, looking at inflammation, the gene leads to a higher production of an inflammatory gene, and that then leads to a higher systemic risk for higher inflammation. And because of that, it can drive a number of chronic disease states, and possibly because of previous exposures, previous traumatic events, a family history of depression or cognitive decline, and then a poor environment, poor diet, poor lifestyle, that all culminates together. Remember, it's the genes plus the environment leading to an increased risk of having some kind of disorder. And so for healthcare practitioners and for clients and patients to understand this information, to be able to really target those weak areas or those areas that require support, to put one back on a level playing field. You can get insights as to what you might be predisposed to, and then you also get insights into how to fix those areas or how to support those areas as best as possible to decrease risk for chronic disorders. Here we're talking mental health. It could be, I mean, if you listen to the DNA health one, we could be talking about diabetes or heart disease. In this case, we're just talking about mental health disorders. So just another area of health, but the same concept applies. It's not diagnostic, but it's insights to improve health and giving targeted information and interventions to improve those health areas. In some cases, and having said that, in some cases, it is more just about being able to understand yourself better, and maybe it's not a dietary intervention, but maybe a learning process to understand, well, this is who I am intrinsically, and be able to learn how to adapt in certain situations where you might be more predisposed to stress. You might have more of an addictive inclination. Being more aware of that helps you to become more conscious of those behaviors and fight just sometimes the more raw innate drivers that might be increasing risk for something like anxiety or addiction, etc., etc. Okay, so starting off, this is the table where I like to focus a lot. It's your summary table of results where you will see each of the biological areas that we are speaking about in the test. And this is where we've looked at the evidence, reviewed what the evidence is saying around which genes we can include in the test that have sufficient evidence to actually speak about and report on these different disorders, your neurodegenerative, your mood regulation, your addictive behaviors. We look at the gene, so the gene name is written there, the variation on the gene, remembering that if you think of your gene or that DNA helix, that strand, it's like this long twisted ladder. You climb the steps of your ladder and you get to a specific position on your gene. At that position, it could be something like on this one, IL-1, it's encoding for your interleukin-1 gene, and you climb all the way to position 4845, so that's a lot of climbing, but at that position, you could either get a G or a T at that position. So then, depending on what mom and dad gave you, you will get your genotype that is then written over here. So this one showing a GG genotype. And then this is where your focus needs to be is, well, why is this interesting, or does it mean anything different for me? When you're seeing a moderate or a high impact, and that's denoted by, you will see over here, these how to read the results. So a no impact is one clear circle, a low impact, one colored blue circle, and anything, so your 2 and your 3 circles are your moderate and high impact respectively. And then you can sometimes get a beneficial impact factor. So that meaning that when you get a beneficial impact factor, we don't have any in this report, that it's associated with an improved functioning of the eventual enzyme or protein or receptor that we have been investigating, and that's because of the variant or the genotype that you carry, leading to a better function of that specific enzyme or protein, and so protection against a specific disorder. Where you really want to focus on the red flags or the blue flags in this case, and really just say, okay, this is the light bulb, this is a big area of concern for me. This is where I really want to target my support, is where you're seeing a lot of these moderate and high impact factors coming through. And that's saying that based on what we've seen in the literature, that those specific genotypes for that specific gene is related to an unwanted response or an abnormal response to specific interventions, and an increased predisposition for a certain disorder, be it either in the neurodegenerative side, the mood dysregulation side, or the addictive behavior side. and how you're able to see that quite quickly. So how I look at this part of the report and to really try and understand it a little bit better is I would be able to say, looking at this one, okay, there's quite a lot coming up. And I'm looking at top down on the N for neurodegenerative side. Remember Alzheimer's, late onset Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, dementia. We are seeing quite a few moderate and high impact factors coming through there. And then I look across and I see that's all related to inflammation. So that means that in order to control or decrease my predisposition or kind of balance me out a little bit, decrease my risk for cognitive decline, I would want to really address inflammation because that's where all my high impact factors are coming through. If I then look across to the rest of the report, if I look at the impact factors coming through on the M for mood dysregulation, there's quite a lot. So maybe you might look at this and if this is something that resonates with you in your report, you'd be able to see, okay, well, I have a lot of moderate and high impact factors coming through in the M. I maybe have a family history of depression or anxiety. I myself may feel anxious or depressed in certain situations, especially when my environment is not suited to my genotype, where I'm not looking after myself as well as I know I should. And so extra care needs to be given to decrease risk for those disorders. And what you can get and gain from this report is, where does that extra care need to go? Where do I need to focus on that biological level from a nutraceutical standpoint, diet, lifestyle, exercise, cognitive functioning, to be able, stress management, to be able to decrease my inflammatory response, to support my want signaling pathway, and I'll get into that. It's very much linked to inflammation as well, to manage my stress response, to balance out cell signaling, so I'm not like on this hyper level all the time, and then look at what is going on my BDNF, which is really, really important in terms of cognitive functioning, stress response, memory formation, and addictive behavior. So that is where you would be able to start really getting insights as to what to do based on where you're getting these moderate and high impact factors, what it's related to in terms of N, M, or A. There is overlap, but then you can see, okay, well, what is my family history? And then pull it back to what is the biological area that needs to be supported and how do I support that biological area? And so if I were to look then at the last part of this table, I see the A for addictive behavior. I see then I go down and I see, okay, well, yeah, there are a few moderate impacts and there's this one high impact. It's definitely this little BDNF that needs a lot of support. So that's where a big focus of mine is going to be. But in terms of overall issues, no real high impacts otherwise. I would say I would rather want to, like the big I would say the biggest focus is going to be on the M, the mood regulation. But again, if you're seeing these little moderate impacts coming up and you can see, okay, it's all actually related to the dopaminergic side, which makes sense, dopamine addiction, we'll go into that now, and what to do about it. And again, thinking, do I have, am I inclined to addictive behaviors? Do I have a family history of it? And how to manage it. So that's really, I think, just a snapshot of getting an idea of where you want to focus. Then you can go into the extreme detail, and that's where you actually get into, after that page, we go through each of the biological areas in detail, starting off with lipid metabolism, where we speak about this ApoE gene, which is also mentioned in the DNA health test. It's spoken about a lot with regards to heart disease, cardiovascular health, lipid metabolism. Over here, still, it functions in the area of lipid metabolism, but it's also produced, and it also, but it functions within your your neuroendocrine system as well. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at how does it affect oxidative stress? How does it affect lipid metabolism within the brain? And it has a strong emphasis on your amyloid beta deposition, which is one of the markers when we're looking at, say, cognitive decline. It's one of these markers that researchers and healthcare practitioners may look for individuals who are leading towards or presenting with symptoms of cognitive decline. It's something that they might want to start looking at in terms of brain scans and things like that, is this amyloid beta deposition. And this is where your ApoE gene plays a major role in kind of controlling how much of that actually forms and kind of the health of the brain. So you will see that then the gene is mentioned, the gene specific information, so where it's functioning, what it does, all of that is given to you in the report. So you can actually, if you take some time and go through the information in the report, there is a lot of insights given over there. And then what I think is most important is obviously what the result is and whether there is that impact factor that is moderate or high impact factor assigned to your genotype. And you can see clearly again, it's repeated here. So you can see for this individual, E3, no impact. So again, showing that over here. And so because of that, that's not an area that I'm going to focus on. So I'm not going to dwell on it. I'd rather move on to the next section. If it were an E4 genotype, E3, E4, or E4, E4, that is where this gene has been associated with an increased risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease, increased risk for cognitive decline and dementia. Remember, genotype plus environment. So there's a lot of research going to this gene and the specific genotype. In terms of interventions, to put it in the nutshell, stay away from toxins. Keep your environment as healthy as possible. Put yourself into sort of a bubble of health. Stress management, avoiding oxidative stress. So no smoked foods, no cigarette smoking, no pollution, no alcohol. And then moderate intensity exercise with a wealth of the rainbow in terms of your diet, lots of colors, a good quality omega-3 fatty acid supplement, quite rich in the good quality fats, especially omega-3s, your EPA and DHA coming from your fatty fish. Again, as I mentioned, that omega-3 fatty acid supplement, and then low in your refined carbohydrates and your animal fats. So that's something in a nutshell, how to support your E4 genotype. A lot of the time, what is good for the heart is good for the brain, and you will see that coming through in your ApoE4 genotype. When we talk about inflammation, all you need to really do, and this is what I'm actually going to go back to that table now to go through the genes. But what you will see here is, again, the biological pathway of inflammation being explained, how it impacts these different mental health disorders, and then what to do. If you come out with a moderate or high impact factor, you will then see is that it's associated with actually neurodegenerative and mood dysregulation disorders, what the gene does, what the genotype means, and what to do about it. So when I'm speaking inflammation, I actually speak about it as an overall effect, because what you see there is if you've got a lot of moderate and high impact factors coming through, what that means is your risk for having chronic low-grade inflammation is higher, and that is going to affect cognitive decline and mood dysregulation, especially depressive disorders. You need to get your inflammation down, especially if you are considering your SSRIs. If you're on an SSRI, so you're on any kind of antidepressant medication, there's so much research supporting actually getting your inflammation in check to make those other medications more effective. And if you're not on medications, again, if you inclined towards depression, or if there's a family history of cognitive decline, you want to manage your inflammation. A lot of these inflammation genes are also reported in DNA health. When I think of inflammation, it's weight management. It's a Mediterranean style diet. So plant-based, fatty fish, seasonal variety, good gut health, take your probiotic, um, and then stress management, very, very important. Lastly, eat a lot of your blueberries. So your blues, your reds, your dark purples are absolutely fantastic for decreasing the production of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, these firing genes, and how to dampen them is with those blues and those really rich colors. So that's something I would recommend for inflammation. When it comes to methylation, these are all genes tested in DNA health, but very strongly, these specific SNPs, very, very strongly related to risk for depressive related disorders as well as bipolar disorder. And so this is an area where your good quality B vitamins become extremely important, considering methylfolate, avoiding any folic acid of any sorts that comes from food fortification sources as well, eating lots of green leafy vegetables, and then again stress management. So that's where your methylation, your B vitamins, your choline is very, very important for mood regulation. I mentioned this want signaling. This is where it's actually a gene that creates oxidative stress. It's kind of like it's like this little defense warrior that when it's attacked, it kind of explodes and wants to attack everything in its path to try and really get rid of that trigger, that kind of trauma. And so it's a gene that increases inflammation, increases oxidative stress, and actually promotes cell death. And in times of stress, that's sometimes kind of what you want in like small or acute stress situations. That's kind of a defense mechanism. But when you've got this chronic stress, especially in childhood, and especially if you think about what everyone's gone through over the last few years, it can then get almost chronically activated. And with these variants, it's expressed at a higher level already. So it's like this extra active, alert warrior when it shouldn't always be like that. And you just want to calm this guy down a little bit. And how you do that is by managing emotional stress, cognitive behavioral therapy, looking at your omega-3 fatty acids, really, really important. And indirectly, through managing inflammation, you will manage this guy really well. So stress management, inflammation management through what I've mentioned through the pro-inflammatory pathway is going to really help address this GSK3 beta a lot, to try and decrease the kind of the overactivation of it. It has been associated with sort of earlier onset bipolar and depressive disorders. And it's a good indicator more so than for healthcare practitioners if this comes up, if there's a family history, but you also need that kind of chronic trauma to really see the expression of it in terms of a mental health disorder. We then move on to the stress response genes. I would say these really, really nice ones to look at. So FKBP5, increasing your cortisol response, OXTR, kind of trying to dampen that and balance it down. It's your oxytocin receptor. Often thought about women going into labor, you get a rush of oxytocin. That oxytocin is good for love, affection, and that's also when you get it expressed a lot. It helps fight pain and it's anti-inflammatory. So to produce oxytocin, you want to have positive physical touch. Acts of goodwill and charitable acts also help with oxytocin production. Your vitamin D helps as well as your omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin C. And then for FKBP5, it's a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy, realizing in stressful situations you may just have this over response of this cortisol. And so that's where your omega-3 fatty acids and your zinc plays a very strong role. And anything that's going to help produce oxytocin is going to actually help dampen down that FKBP5 production. And that's where you're going to get really good stress management. And I would say your cognitive behavioral therapy and stress management techniques become very important in those situations. In terms of cell signaling, this is where if you've got genes over here, it means that they're like chronically fired up. And so there's hyperexcitability, which means that your mood regulation is going to be off. Variance here means that you're going to kind of fly off the hand a little bit more easily. Small things may trigger you. You're not kind of a sort of slow and steady person. It's one way or the other. Here, looking at hydration, and again, omega-3 fatty acids and zinc. So a lot actually coming through from that side. And there are a lot of diagnostic insights here. The one really interesting thing I want to mention when it comes to AKT1 is looking at, so in cell signaling, which is a little bit different to these other ones, ANK3, your CACNA1s, and your ANK3 and your CACNA1s, which is kind of like your explosive ones. Your AKT1 is mentioned here in your addictive behaviors, and it's mentioned actually because of cannabis response, especially to THC and risk for psychosis, which is extremely relevant now, considering that it is being legalized in so many more countries. Absolutely, where it's medically indicated, there is a place for it. But keep in mind that if you have a high impact here on AKT1 and you chronically use THC-based products, there is a significant increased risk for psychosis and schizophrenia. So a very, very nice one as an indicator, and try and mostly as a genotype to say, what can we do to prevent this kind of disorder from occurring? And then your these other ones in cell signaling is your ChRNA3s, and those are to do with nicotine addiction. And so if you come up with those, the intervention really is looking at not just willpower. You may need added support to stop smoking. And if you have stopped smoking, never start again, because the risk is much higher to become addicted again. I want to go through these other areas and really give them justice, but it does become quite an overwhelming set of results to go through. So I think another session to go through the dopaminergic to the serotonergic systems would be really great, and I look forward to seeing you again.